Most people have never heard of Hercules Mulligan. Most people have never heard of him. Some people have heard of George Washington. You ever heard of George Washington? I think you've heard of George Washington. Well, most people have never heard of Hercules Mulligan. Many people have heard of George Washington. You know who he is. You know states named after him. You know universities named after him. You know George Washington. But you've probably never heard of Hercules Mulligan. He was a famous person in his time and his day because his job was to get everybody dressed all the time. He was a tailor who lived in New York City at the time of the Revolutionary War. And I said he was famous, but really only famous among the people who lived there. And if you know your history, the Revolutionary War, you know that New York City in 1776 was kind of the hub of everything happened in the Revolution, and it was captured by the British. So for about 7 years, the British were in charge of New York City, and this guy named Hercules Mulligan, he kept his tailoring shop going. And because most people at the time in that city were loyal to the British, he was hearing a lot of things. But he was still loyal to George Washington, to Alexander Hamilton, to plenty of people like that. So what he would do is he'd serve as a spy, and he'd send messages out of New York City of stuff that was going to go on. And in 1779, a couple years after New York was captured, there was a plot that was made against George Washington's life. They were going to assassinate him. The British had it all planned. They had it all figured out. And he heard of it because, he's a tailor. So that means he's working on people's clothes, and he's around a lot of important people. He heard about it, immediately sent a message out to Washington, and the whole army moved course. And they went a different way because of this information from Mulligan. A couple years later, there was another plot on George Washington's life. Hercules Mulligan heard of it, shared that message very quickly, and Washington's life was spared twice. If there was no Hercules Mulligan, George Washington would not have been the person that we know him in history to have been in America's history, being so pivotal and so important. There are oftentimes unsung heroes behind the scene making it happen, and if it were not for them and the work that they do, the people that we know as very influential could not have done what they did. And there's a person in the Bible that you know named the Apostle Paul, but there's a person in the Bible you probably don't know a lot about, and I want to tell you about today. And I think there's so much we can learn from this person. This person's name was Onesiphorus. What do you know about Onesiphorus? Do you know anything about him? Do you know anything about his kids? Do you know anything about his works? Do you know anything about his actions? Who was Onesiphorus, and what did he do for the Apostle Paul? Maybe you've read his name. Maybe you've tried to pronounce it, and maybe had a hard time pronouncing it, but in 2 Timothy, as Paul tells Timothy to be strong for the gospel, and as he tells him to be bold for the gospel, he says, I want to remind you of your friend and mine, Onesiphorus. And I want to tell you what Onesiphorus did for me, because if it were not for Onesiphorus, I could not do what I'm doing as an apostle. So I want you to open your Bibles and look at this friend, and I think today what we can learn is something about Christian friendship from this guy named Onesiphorus. We're only looking at 4 verses today. We're looking at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15. I'm going to start there. We're only going to go to verse 18. Really simple passage today. A little bit of explanation for you about these people. So he had just told Timothy, I'm going to be gone. You're going to have to stand for the faith even when I'm gone. I want you to guard the good deposit. I want you to keep sharing the gospel. Keep standing for the truth. Follow the pattern of sound words. Don't be ashamed of me, and don't be ashamed of the gospel. Those two important things. Don't be ashamed of me or the gospel. Coming in verse number 12 here and verse number 8, super important. That's what he's trying to tell Timothy. And if you were reading this letter, it would only take you 45 seconds to read the first chapter. So this comes right after that. He's still in this flow of thought telling Timothy, don't be ashamed of me and don't be ashamed of the gospel. Which you might say, most of us can't say that about people. Hey, don't be ashamed of me. And if you're ashamed of me, you're going to be ashamed of the gospel. Because most of us are not apostles. In fact, none of us are apostles. And most of us, in fact, don't even stand for the truth in such a way like Paul, that being loyal to Paul is also being loyal to the gospel. Are your friends, if they had to be loyal to you, does that mean loyalty to the gospel, or does it just mean loyalty to you? Really, for most of us, it's not usually so intertwined like it is for Paul. So we live in a very different situation, but there's something we can learn about this situation, because he's basically telling Timothy, don't be ashamed of me, don't be ashamed of the gospel. And let me give you 2 examples. there are two groups of people. One group was ashamed of me and ashamed of the gospel, and one group was not. So look at verse 15. He says, Timothy, you're aware that all who were in Asia turned away from me. So a lot of people live in Asia. Okay, that's like, what is he saying? Every person who lived in Asia? Well, we're talking about the region, Asia Minor, where the church of Ephesus was. Okay, a lot of other famous churches. Remember how in the book of Revelation, there were 7 churches there? It's that group, okay? It's that group of churches. And he says the people in that region, they all turned away. Now, is it every last person? Not every last person, but he's going to tell us some people that stuck by his side. But for the most part, he's like, guys, when I went to jail, when I got arrested, once Nero started going after me, and it was clear that other Christians would be persecuted, guess where all my support went? It just kind of evaporated. They all kind of turned away. And 2 people in particular, maybe who were leaders in getting people to turn away, or maybe these were pastors, or we don't know really much of anything about these 2 individuals. All we know is that they're listed among the people that abandoned Paul when Paul needed support. Phygelus and Hermogenes. This is among whom were Phygelus and Hermogenes. So probably those 2 guys were well known to Timothy. Maybe those 2 guys were pastors that Timothy appointed. Maybe they were pastors that Paul appointed. Maybe they weren't pastors. Maybe they're just really influential, and they tried to get everyone to say, Paul's getting too extreme here. We don't want to go to jail for standing up for the gospel. Like, there's probably a way for us to just keep living our lives and not to stand out from the crowd. So let's not be as extreme as Paul. All we know is Paul knows that these guys were the ringleaders in this, and he says, you know how everyone turned away from me? Later he'll say, at the end of the book, that nobody stood by his side. Like, and it's kind of hyperbole to say nobody, because he'll list up one guy who does. But for the most part, it's like, guys, nobody stuck with me. I'm here suffering for the gospel, and I look around, and guess what? All the people that said they were so solid for God, where are they? They've abandoned me. And then in verse number 16, he transitions to say, but there is a guy that you should know who did stand with me, Onesiphorus, that not so famous guy who should be more famous in our mind. In verse 16, Paul says, may the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me, and he was not ashamed of my chains. So, if we take a step back, what's Paul telling Timothy? Don't you be ashamed of my chains. Don't you be ashamed of the gospel. And man, there's this guy, Onesiphorus. He wasn't ashamed. It says the household of Onesiphorus. That means the family. This is a very interesting thing Paul is saying. He's saying, may God be good to Onesiphorus' wife and kids. Oh, I want God to just be so good to his wife and kids. Not to him. You see how it says, to the household of Onesiphorus. We're not talking about Onesiphorus. He's just saying, I just really hope that God is good. And I'm praying to God that God would almost like repay his children for the good that he has done, because he was not ashamed. He refreshed me often. But verse 17, when he arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly and found me. So if it takes a lot of work to find somebody, this isn't just because like Rome's a big city. You know what I mean? Like in Rome, it's such a big city and everybody's like, you got to find each other. I don't think that's what he's talking about, because remember where Paul is. Paul is in his last imprisonment. He's like an official prisoner of the Emperor Nero, okay? He's about to be put to death. He's in that dungeon place, that dark room, one way in, one way out. He's probably chained to a soldier. That's what history would tell us, okay? So in order to find him, you have to ask a lot of people. Do you know where Paul is? Paul the Christian. Who? Paul the Christian. I don't know what you're talking about. And some people would disregard. But how many people did he have to ask to figure out where Paul was? 15 people? 20 people? Do you understand, like, even asking that question, where's, like, the secret prisoner? Do you know what you're doing every time you ask that question? You're letting another person know, and another person know, and another person know. And guess what? A lot of people might find out that you want to go see Paul if you really started asking around. So what he's saying is, man, he wasn't even ashamed. He didn't care who he ran into. He was just like, where's Paul? Where's Paul? Do you know where Paul is? Do you know where he's being kept? Let me talk to a Roman officer. Let me talk to a guard. Let me talk to someone who might know. He was not ashamed to be associated with Paul. You see how that's a contrast to those people that were like, we don't want to have anything to do with Paul. He's suffering. He can go suffer over there. I don't want to have anything to do. But he's like, dude, this guy found me. There's a play on words in the next verse. It said, Onesiphorus found Paul. So he says, may the Lord grant Onesiphorus to find mercy from the Lord on that day. That's a dad joke. That's a play on words. He's like, man, he found me, so may he find mercy, right, from God on the last day. Even to be more specific, you know when we're reading these books by Paul, when we talk about the Lord, almost always, we are talking about Jesus. Because if we're talking about God the Father, he'll usually say that. He'll make it explicit. But when we run into the word like, may the Lord do this, or the Lord said this, he's talking about Jesus. So here's what he's saying. May Jesus give Onesiphorus mercy on the day of judgment. You might say, where did that come from? It came from the verse we just read in the scripture reading. Remember in Matthew 25? That scene about like, if you show mercy to God's people, then he's like, Jesus says, you did it to me. So he's invoking that promise. He's saying like, I was in prison and he visited me. I needed something and he came by my side. So Jesus, give that guy mercy. You show mercy. You be good to him in the judgment in the end when you evaluate his life. And he goes on, he says, and you, Timothy, you well know all the service that Onesiphorus, he rendered at Ephesus. So the majority of this has been Paul saying, man, he helped me out in Rome. He helped me out where I am. He's like the only guy who showed up for me in prison. And then he reminds Timothy, but like, what do I need to tell you about Onesiphorus? You know, he was with you at your church. And what we'll find out later in chapter 4, verse 19, when Paul finishes the book and he's like, greet this person and that person. In 4:19, he says, greet Prisca and Aquila and greet the household of Onesiphorus. So Timothy's like this pastor in Ephesus who goes to his church. Onesiphorus' wife and kids and his family, they're all there in Timothy's church. So he's like, dude, don't you remember when Onesiphorus was like helping you out when he was with you? Dude, Onesiphorus is such a great guy. It's interesting that in the middle of this whole passage about being bold for the gospel, Paul gives a little sermon here about how you need to be a good friend like Onesiphorus. And that's what I want us to take away from this text. Only 4 verses. I want to look at this and say, okay, what can we learn about Christian friendship and being a supportive person like Onesiphorus? Just like we learned about Paul and how he encouraged Timothy, we learned from Paul's example. Now we're going to learn from Onesiphorus' example. I'm trying to say that enough times so that you know who Onesiphorus is. Like, you can be an Onesiphorus for people. That's like a code word. You say that, nobody will know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? So you can be an Onesiphorus for other people. So let's look at the qualities here. But first, let's look at the people who left him behind. Okay? It says that all who were in Asia turned away from me. Paul. Who is Paul? What's Paul's job? Right? What is he known as? Right now, what is, I guess, his job? He's a tent maker. We know that he made tents, but that's not how people knew him. He wasn't Paul's famous tent maker, and he had some brand, and he had 100,000 Instagram followers, and like, that's not what Paul's known for. What was Paul known for? You could be interactive here. What was he known for? Do you know, Paul? What was he known for? What do you think? This is audience participation hour. What do you think? Preaching? Preaching what? You just shouting something? Crazy man, right? What was he known for? Preaching the gospel. Okay, that's good, right? That's what he's known for. So why is he preaching the gospel? Because he just thought that was a good idea? No, because God told him to. Jesus directly said, you are going to be my apostle. So he's on a mission for God. He is not doing this for himself. He is not like taking up this selfish career where he's becoming an influencer and making a ton of money from representing Jesus, okay? That is not what he's doing. He is on mission for God in the world, right? And he's suffering on behalf of this mission that God has directly entrusted him with, okay? So when we talk about abandoning friends or leaving people behind, just understand what's actually happening here. This is people who are saying, I'm a servant of God. I'm a Christian. And that person, Paul, he's also a Christian. He's also a servant of God. In fact, he's even more of a servant of God than most people, right? But I don't want to be associated with him. He's God's servant, but I don't want to be known. I don't want to be connected with him. He's doing God's work, but like, can he do it away from me? I don't want to be associated with God's servant. That That's the offense. That's why he's like, man, they're turning away. Even this word, they turned away, most of the time it's used in the New Testament, it's talking about turning away doctrinally too. Like not being about the right stuff anymore. So there's a lot loaded into that term most of the time it's used. Here, I don't know if that's actually included here. I don't know if these people are turning away from the gospel, but he talks like, man, they're not about the cause anymore. They're not about sharing the gospel in the same way because they're ashamed of me. So what I think we can learn about this in our lives, point number one, is I don't want us to selfishly abandon God's servants. And I want you to think about it that way. Not all of your friends are servants of God, okay? Not all the people you know in life are servants of God. But there are people in your life that are doing good and godly work, and they're doing it rightfully, and you might be ashamed to be associated with them. If you're at a campus, and there's a campus lunch happening, and people are inviting people to come get free pizza and hear the gospel, and you sit there and you think, I just hope nobody finds out that I go to that church. I just hope nobody finds out. Please don't come talk to me. Please don't come talk to me. Oh, I'm in front of all my school friends. I don't want them to know. It's like there's a little tiny, like I know that's not the Apostle Paul who's, going around giving pizza, right? It's Micah Hawley, okay? It's not the Apostle Paul, but like might as well be in that moment, because if he's a representative of Christ and he's trying to invite people, you don't be ashamed to be known as that guy's friend, right? That's the idea, because they're God's servants, okay? And we could be talking about, if your pastors were like persecuted, or your small group leader was under fire for doing the right thing. It's like, you don't be associated to be known as their friend. Don't be like, I could avoid some conflict by distancing myself from them. That's what's going on here with the Apostle Paul. That's what's so wrong about this. So this kind of separation, it's not even like, we see separations in the Bible. One of the separations, the most famous we see, is in Acts chapter 15, where Paul and Barnabas are both serving God, but then they have a disagreement on who should go on the missionary journey with them, and then they separate. Paul would not have written it like this, that Barnabas abandoned me, okay? That was two people that are both committed to the gospel that have a difference of opinion, and they go in a different way. And they serve God well in those two different places. That's not the abandonment we're talking about here, okay? And certainly, I think the most important caveat for you is don't read this and say, man, okay, God's servant, if my friend is a Christian, then man, I need to stick with whatever they're doing, even if it's wrong, okay? That is not what Paul is getting at here, okay? And that's not what I'm getting at. So I don't want you to take this sermon and misapply it and say, that's why I'm going to stick with my friend's bad decisions, okay? That is not what we're talking about, okay? That's really important. Also, it's important to notice that if I talk about loyalty to your friends, right? You need to be loyal to your friends. Is that true or false, right? That's true. But should you, hypothetically, right? Should you be loyal to all the people that you have ever called friend? Should you? Should you be loyal and stick with them and spend all your time with anybody you've ever called a friend? No. So I just don't want you to take this sermon and then be like, yeah, that's why I'm going to keep the friendships that I have that are wrong or maybe leading to immorality or leading to sin. That is not what we're talking about here, okay? That's another important caveat. I know I feel like I'm telling you what the text doesn't say more than what it says here, but just some verses for you from the book of Proverbs. I want to look at Proverbs a lot today. There's so many good relationship helps in the book of Proverbs. Here's a couple, okay, that talk about there is a time and place to break the relationship or to distance in the relationship, okay? There is a time to, if you want to use the strong word, abandon. I know that's probably too strong of a word to describe what we're talking about here. 3 verses for you. One is Proverbs 13, verse 20 and 21, okay? Proverbs 13, 20 and 21. Here's what it says. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Disaster pursues sinners, but with the righteous, they are rewarded with good. So, that's pretty clear. Yeah, you want to be with certain people, and there's other people you don't want to be with. The point in this text is, guys, is Paul the bad guy or the good guy? Paul's the good guy, and they're stepping away from the good guy. That's not good. Another one from Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 10 to 15. Another good section. Proverbs 1, 10 to 15. Proverbs is this book, right, where it's father to son wisdom. My son, listen to this. Listen to me, please. Listen to me. It's probably what your parents tell you. You might not believe me, but you should listen, and you'll believe it one day, right? That's how Proverbs is written. Proverbs 1, verse 10 to 15 says this, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us, let us lay in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole. Like those who go down to the pit, we shall find all precious goods, and we shall fill our houses with their plunder.'" Right? It's like, you going to listen to that? You want to be loyal to those friends? He says, no, don't do that. He says later, he says, "My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths." So, will there ever be a time where you might have to leave a friendship? And they say, "You're abandoning me. Why are you abandoning me?" Don't be like, "Oh man, I heard that sermon from Pastor John. I said, you're not supposed to abandon our friends, so we can't do that," right? The question is why, right? If the reason is you have sinners in your life that are enticing you to sin and then you take a step away from them in relationship, you should, because that's what the Bible would tell you to do. That is not what these people are doing with Paul. They're distancing themselves from the righteous one and becoming sinners in the process. Another one, Proverbs 23, verse 17 to 21, another good section here in Proverbs, where he says, "Don't let your heart envy sinners." Don't look at their life and say, "Man, I just wish I could be with them." But continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Hear, my son, and be wise. Direct your heart in the right way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. Okay, is there ever a time and a place? This is the third passage I'm giving you. Is there ever a time and a place to abandon a friendship? Absolutely. Absolutely, okay? So don't hear the sermon and think, no, okay? What we're talking about here is so different than that. We've got to understand, and even here's another one. What if you have a friend who's suffering, right? You kind of have to know a little bit about why they're suffering before you can give them the right kind of comfort, right? You want to be there, at least talk to them. You don't want to abandon people physically if they're going through something hard, right? But then we got to understand, why are you suffering the way you're suffering, right? And maybe you can't figure that out immediately, but if it's obvious that they are suffering for their sin, instead of saying, "You're right. Oh, you're so right. They're so wrong. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe." Be careful, right? Here's another verse for you to write down. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 14 to 17, where there Peter says, "Hey, if you're insulted for Christ, that's good. You're blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed. Let him glorify God in that name." So here's what we got to be careful about too. If someone says, "Man, I'm suffering, I'm just suffering, and man, it's just, God's putting me in this super bad trial, and it's just so hard, and I feel like I'm being persecuted and attacked," before you say, "Oh yeah, that's terrible, man, I'm on your side in this." Before you do that, you have to be careful and have to figure out, are you suffering for your sin? Doesn't mean there's no compassion. Especially if you're dealing with a Christian who's being disciplined by God, you want to show compassion. But before you give your unmitigated loyalty and support, you do have to kind of understand, why is this person suffering? Okay? If we were to apply that same test to the Apostle Paul, why are you suffering? What's going on? Because I'm standing bold for the gospel. I'm telling people about Jesus. Because Rome doesn't like it. Because I'm saying that Jesus is the only Lord, not Caesar. That's why he was suffering. So if you put him through all those tests, you say, he's not suffering as an evildoer. He's not suffering because he murdered somebody. He's suffering for the truth. He's suffering for the right thing. So I'm not going to abandon that servant of God. There's so many reasons why they could have abandoned him. And the text doesn't tell us, so we don't know, but just to guess a little bit, probably some people thought Paul was too extreme. They thought, I don't want to suffer. Do you really want to get in a religion where you could be taken away from your wife and kids because you're telling people the truth about Jesus? No, it's too extreme. I don't want to be a part of that. That could have been a reason why these people pulled back. Some people might have thought, man, he was cool when he was here, the Apostle Paul, but man, he must have lost his mind. How did he go and get himself arrested? Yeah. Here's the other hard thing. You could say, isn't that Paul, isn't that your pastor? Isn't that the guy that shared the gospel with you? and you got saved and under his ministry, because that was true for a lot of these people who turned away. You know what they all said? Yeah, but I don't really associate with him anymore. That's the heartbreak, right? Imagine being Paul. Imagine going from town to town, being persecuted and preaching the gospel, and some people are getting saved and they get baptized, and you're there celebrating, and they're the very ones that turn around and stab you in the back, right? It's very hard for the Apostle Paul. And it's going to be hard for you, because some of you will be in that situation where you, perhaps, will lead someone to Christ, and then they'll turn on you, and they'll abandon you, right? That's part of the Christian life right here. They may have said he lost his mind, he's too extreme. Maybe some people would say, yeah, I would do it differently than what Paul's doing, right? I don't agree with his methods, right? He's too bold. Like, if he was just nicer to the Romans, maybe he wouldn't be in jail. He needs to be more winsome to the Romans and the Jews. Everybody seems to hate Paul. Like, why can't he just share it better? When I share it with people, everybody doesn't hate me, right? There's a lot of reasons why they may have pulled back from Paul, but they're not good. The reason I had you write down the words God's servants is just to remind you, if we pull back in the relationships from the people who are doing the right thing, if it is true that they are God's servants and they are doing God's work, just realize how offensive it is to God that we abandon his servants who are doing the right thing, okay? That's offensive. If you ever get a job, if you ever work in a restaurant and you end up being like a host or hostess or something, you stand at the front, and if you go to work at a really nice restaurant, like, Dana Point or Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, you'll stand there, you'll be wearing your fancy clothes, and a lot of people want to get a table, right? And you got your little iPad there, and you know the names of the people who have reservations, and you're like no. Yes. Oh, yes, Mr. So-and-so. Like, good to see you. Got a table for 4. It's all ready for you. Imagine you work at some really nice restaurant, and I don't know, this group of 4 women, middle-aged women, show up. And you don't have to hate that part, right? I don't know why you're all... I know that they're statistically more likely to complain, but that's okay. That's like the Karen. If 4 Karens show up, right? Let's really make it bad here, okay? 4 Karens show up, and they're like, yeah, we need a table. And you can just see it as they're walking up. You know they're going to call the manager. They just smell like they'll call the manager. They just see him like, uh-oh, here it comes. And they roll up and they just, they want to do that. And you just know, and you and your buddy or your person who's another host are like, dude, we're going to tell these people no. And you're like, no, no reservation, no. And they're like, oh, no reservation, no spots? No spots. No spots for you guys. No, we're full, we're totally booked. Okay. And they walk away and leave. And then maybe more experienced hosts, or maybe somebody who used to be a host that now is like a waiter or something, they show up and say, do you have any idea who that was that you turned away? That's the owner's wife and all of her friends, and it's her birthday. Did you turn her away? You'd be like, oh, no. Yeah, I didn't know. They're not on the list. Like, well, it doesn't matter if they're on the list. That's the owner's wife. You can't do that. And then you'd be running down the street in Laguna Beach. No, wait, I didn't know, right? Okay, I want you to imagine, from heaven's perspective, how dumb it is that, what's their names? Phygellus and Hermogenes said, I'm not about you, the Apostle Paul. Goodness gracious. Who is the Apostle Paul? And even this, who is the Apostle Paul to Jesus? He's not just, kind of important. He's really important to Jesus. And these people are saying, nah, turn their nose up. Right? And I wonder, even in this room, in your relationships, who are the people that Jesus highly, highly values because they are servants in your life and in other people's life that God cares a lot about and that you might be tempted to turn your nose up at, right? That is wrong. And that's what I want to challenge us with. Right? If we're dealing with God's servants, doing good things in our life and standing for God, don't you say, I don't want to be associated with them. We got to be super careful about that. That's the first thing. Second thing, Onesiphorus was such a good friend. I want to learn some things from his life. So at the time we have left, we're going to go through all those little subpoints that you got. But first, I want you to notice in the text, verse 16, he says, may the Lord grant mercy to Onesiphorus' family, to his household. For he often refreshed me, and he was not ashamed of my chains. So at the center of this is this idea that Onesiphorus refreshed Paul. What does that mean? There's a lot of things that could mean, but we know he showed up for him. We know a lot of things. But we know that he refreshed Paul's soul. And I think even in your friendships, in your relationships, if you got people that you're interacting with that are living for God, we oftentimes don't think, I want to refresh their soul. I want to be good for their soul. I want to encourage them before God. So point number 2, I want us to learn how to refresh the souls of our friends. Learn to refresh the souls of your friends. You ever had a long day and maybe you didn't eat anything, and then you get to dinner time, maybe you had to miss lunch or something, maybe you don't eat much breakfast, maybe you're golfing all day, and then you show up. I don't know if this ever happened to any of us, but I know it's happened to me. And then you get to the end of the day, maybe you didn't have enough coffee, and then you show up, and there's like this great 3x3 In-N-Out burger that's right there, right? Oh, I mean, think about that, right? Are we salivating, excuse me, if you're just excited right now about how good that food is. A pizza that you like from your best pizza place, like, oh, a salad perhaps, if that's what, I don't know. Like, but it's so good. And then you eat it, and you just like melt back into your seat. You're like, oh, that was so good, right? That was refreshing. Or maybe it's, you're really warm, you've been sweating a ton, and like, man, you just get that cold drink of water, and you just drink for a long time, and you just think, oh, that was really satisfying, really refreshing, okay? That is what Onesiphorus was for Paul's soul. And now I want us to learn, how do we do that? Stuff we can learn from the text. First of all, Onesiphorus is not with his family. You should know that. He is apart from his family. His family's with Timothy, but Onesiphorus is with Paul. They're separated by hundreds of miles and, let's say, a month or more journey. And if he's there often, guess what? Where is Onesiphorus not? He is not with wife. He's not with kids. And I could say, why is he not there? It's because he's with Paul. He made great sacrifices to be there. First thing we can learn, letter A, make sacrifices for your friends. He's gone from his family for a long time. He's not sleeping in his own bed. Right? Maybe he's spending the night talking to Paul in the dungeon, sitting there on the concrete floor, tied to the stinky Roman soldier. But that's where he is, instead of where he could be. Onesiphorus makes sacrifices. And I encourage you, what sacrifices can you make for your friends? How can you put your comfort aside, your wishes aside, so that you can be there and helpful for your friends and refresh their souls? Jesus said in John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. I'd encourage you with Onesiphorus with that. Then it says he showed up often. He often refreshed me, right? Letter B, here's something you can do. You can regularly encourage your friends. Don't just show up once, right? But just something we can all learn from this is there needs to be like a pattern, a regularity, like a checking in, a spending time with, especially if there's suffering going on. Be there regularly for them. Regularly encourage them. He often refreshed me, which probably looked like certain words that were encouraging and also certain supplies. He probably gave him food and water. It was like when Onesiphorus leaves, notice what Paul does. He's like, Timothy, can you please come? Like, that's what the whole book is about. It's a request for Timothy to show up. And it seems like, yeah, Onesiphorus has just left, and that was awesome. Like, hey, Timothy, can you show up before I die, and can you visit me too? Regularly encourage your friends. And encourage, I know that's like a word. It's a word about words. So Proverbs have a lot to say about that. How can we encourage with our words? Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. There's so much power in your words, to give life or to give death. Proverbs 16:24 says, gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Gracious words. That's Proverbs 16:24. Another proverb, Proverb 12:25 says, anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Right? Paul had plenty of things to be concerned about, and I'm sure his heart was weighed down at times because of his terrible situation, but a good word makes him glad. That's Proverbs 18:21, Proverbs 16:24, Proverbs 12:25. So, question for you. How can you be a regular encouragement for your friends? Not just once, but how can you do it frequently? We learned something from Onesiphorus. Also, we learned, thirdly, Onesiphorus was not ashamed of Paul's chains. So what does that mean? It means that as he went through Rome, it was like, I don't care that I'm associated with Paul. I don't care. Like, where's Paul? And then when he showed up, it's like, Paul, so good to see you. Right? Was he whispering like, I hope the Roman soldier doesn't hear what I'm saying? I don't think that's the point. Like, he wasn't ashamed of my chains. He came and he brought me food if I needed food. He came and he gave me encouragement. He spent the night just sitting there talking to me because that's what I needed at the time. He was loyal. He wasn't ashamed to be his friend. So thirdly, be loyal to your friends. This is a simple way of putting it, but be loyal. You don't need to be ashamed of being someone's friend if they're suffering for the right thing. And sometimes it's easy to not be ashamed when you're in their presence, but then when you're not in their presence, then you're like, I don't know. They are a little overboard, aren't they? Right? You chameleon. We play both sides sometimes. Paul was not that way at all. He was not ashamed to tell people he cared. He was not ashamed of even the people he ministered to, even though a lot of them were pretty not great. In one instance, the Apostle Paul, this is 1 Thessalonians 2:8, Paul says, so being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. Really over-the-top way of saying, I care so much about you. Like, I didn't just want to share the gospel with you. I wanted to be there with you. I wanted to care in any way that I could. He was very loyal. And I think even that, you want loyal friends? Maybe you be a loyal friend and see how that even affects your friends in a good way, and they might give that back a little bit as time goes on. He was certainly that way. Some proverbs for you. A couple proverbs for you to write down. Proverbs 18:24. This one's really helpful for us. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Right? Got a lot of friends, a lot of people. This is a lot of a problem for some of us. We have, a million friends, but they're only an inch deep, right? Thinking about how, it's all spread out really wide, but, it's pretty shallow friendships. You understand? Our friendships should be more than that, better than that, right? Even if you can only, there's been studies on this, how many friends can a person actually have? A girl can have 20, a guy can have 4, but it's how many real relationships can you have? How many friends do you have? You ever heard studies like this? 12 friends is pretty much the most a person can really handle as legit friends. And then 4 is the most really deep friendships they can have. And then 2 that you really know completely. It's just our capacity is not super great. And maybe that's just a bad thing. Maybe we should be better. We should be able to have more friends than that as we practice. But most people have a hard time having a ton of relationships. Here in Proverbs it says, hey, if you got a lot of friends, you got 100 friends who care about you this much, you may come to ruin. But even one friend who sticks closer than a brother, that's really good. Also, Proverbs 25:14, another passage. Proverbs 25:14 says, like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of a gift that he does not give. Right? A lot of people say, oh, I'll be there for you. Oh, yeah, it's so good. It's like a, big cloud that looks like it's going to rain. Say, great, our crops are going to get food for themselves. This will be awesome. It's going to rain. It's going to be so good. And then, the wind blows it away and there's no rain. He says that's what it's like for a person to boast and say, oh, I'll be such a good friend. I'll be there for you. And then to not show up. A couple verses later, Proverbs 25:19 says, trusting in a treacherous man in a time of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. Have you ever had a bad tooth? Just hurt, it's nagging you, right? He says that's what it's like to trust somebody who's treacherous, right? To lean your weight on somebody who's not going to be there for you. Or like a foot that slips, right? Don't be that kind of treacherous person. I know 2 of those proverbs were negative, but one of them was positive. Be a friend that sticks closer than a brother. I think that's what Onesiphorus was for Paul there. Then it says, back in our passage, 2 Timothy 1:17, when he showed up in Rome, he searched diligently. He searched earnestly. He searched with his whole heart, and he found me. He made a plan to help. He probably faced some hardship in actually being a good friend, but then he did it. A way that we might put that, letter D, show up for your friends. Actually So be there. Don't just think you're going to, or say that you're going to, or want to, or wish. Be there. We think historically that the imprisonment he's talking about is his last imprisonment, because in Acts chapter 28, when he was in prison in Rome, like it was easy to find him. Lots of people found him. It says people are coming to and fro from his house. This is Acts 28, 30 and 31, the end of that book. All these people were going in and out of Paul's house talking to him. So it's very easy to find. This time, harder to find, difficult, and nobody really did, except for Onesiphorus. So it took some effort. Be there for your friends. One proverb for you here, Proverbs 27:10. This is a longer proverb. Proverbs 27:10 says, "Do not forsake your friend or your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of calamity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away." Right? That's not saying your brother is a bad person or he can't be relied upon, but the point is, like, if you've got proximity to somebody, like proximity beats like familial relationship. Like, it's better to have a friend who's close by who understands than to have a brother who's far away who might understand but doesn't understand yet because he's far away and there's really no access to him. And remember, if you were far away in the ancient world, there was no communication, really. It's hard to do that. So he's saying, like, man, if you had a neighbor, if you had a friend who's really close by you, that's actually going to help you more than trying to take your grievance or your problem and, like, go travel 5 cities over to try to find help and try to re-explain it to somebody, even if they care about you. Proximity is important. That's why it's important for us to show up. So a question for you, like, how can you be there for people? Right? How can you talk or sit there or listen or encourage? How can you pray together? How can you just be there? Right? Because he was just there. That was helpful. And again, your friend's situation is probably not like the Apostle Paul. You're probably not going to go visit someone in a jail cell this afternoon. But even if you did, if they were there for the gospel, if that was the reason, don't be ashamed to go and get your ID out, and get it scanned, and then get a badge, right? Yeah. At jail. They didn't do that back then, obviously, but it was worse. Because you understand how, like, if you showed up at the Apostle Paul, like, why is he there again? He's there for the gospel. The Roman soldiers say, "Are you with this guy? Do you believe all this stuff?" What do you say to that? No. Yeah, I do. Oh, we'll keep that in mind. You see what I'm saying? Like, it would have been dangerous to even say that, right? Especially because he's like a political prisoner at this point in his life. This is not like he's held by the Jewish people under the Jewish law. This is different. Now he's there because the emperor doesn't like him. You think he didn't get on some list by showing up of Christians? You think he didn't get bumped to the top of the list of, like, we need to keep our eye out on this guy and what this guy does? Because he's always visiting the Apostle Paul. This was so dangerous for him to do, but he did. Then verse 18, Paul says, "May the Lord grant him mercy," to find mercy before the Lord. Right? May Jesus give him mercy before he stands at the throne of Jesus, right, in judgment. What can we learn from this? Letter E, we can be rewarded for our friendships. I encourage you, seek this kind of reward. Realize that when you show a kind of compassion and mercy for your friends, like, you think Jesus doesn't see that? You think he doesn't notice? He totally notices. That whole passage we read in the scripture reading, Matthew 25, 31 to 40, is a great example. Right? Jesus takes note of what we do for other people. Even the way Jesus puts it earlier, in Matthew 5, verse 7, he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." That's just an Old Testament truth, too. We find that, Psalm 18, David says that there, right? With the merciful, God will show himself merciful. With the crooked, with the corrupt, God's going to seem torturous to them. We can be rewarded for having good friendships. Have you ever considered that, like, when you sacrifice for your friends or you stand up for the truth, that Jesus knows, that he sees it? He wants to reward that. He's like, yes, that's what I like right there. That's good stuff right there. That should be an encouragement. And then lastly, the last little phrase from our passage, Paul says, "You know well all the service he rendered at Ephesus." Right? What can we learn from that? He's basically telling Timothy, I'm not telling you something you don't know about this dude. This dude was helpful to you too. Onesiphorus did not just pick one person to care for. He wasn't just, an Apostle Paul mega fan, and that's like the only person he helped, right? He helped Timothy too. He probably helped other people. So he wasn't just like this fanatic for one person. He wasn't obsessed with the Apostle Paul or something. That's not what's going on here. He's just a good, faithful servant who's helping all the Christians that he knows in Ephesus. He had a reputation of this. The last thing that we can learn, I want you to be known for your friendships. Letter F, be known for your friendships. That'd be so awesome if what people knew about you was that you were a good friend. That would be glorifying to God. It wouldn't just be awesome for you. Oftentimes we think only in self-serving terms. Jesus is pleased if you are known as a good friend. 2 Proverbs for you on this. Proverbs 22, verse 1 says, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. It's better for you to have a good reputation than to be rich. And then Proverbs 20, verse 6 is a really cool one. Proverbs 20, verse 6 says, many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find? Right? A lot of people claim they're great, they're awesome, but who can find a faithful person? In fact, today I think a lot of people struggle to find faithful people. The studies show, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in America, did a study on people and loneliness. And people who were aged 18 to 34, there was a high percentage of them that claimed to be lonely and to feel lonely like once a day or at least once a day. Do you know what the percentage was of people who claimed to feel real senses of loneliness? Age 18 to 34? 43.3%. So, if that stat was true of this group, right, with the 200 people who are here, that would mean that 86 people in this room regularly feel lonely, okay? I don't know if 86 people in this room would regularly feel lonely, but I bet that's not like completely far off, even if it's 50 people, even if it was 30 people. If that was actually true, like if you look around, everybody, like if 86 of us regularly felt feelings of loneliness, you know who's a neighbor close by and not a brother far away? You, the people who are close by. There's so much you can do, just in your conversations, just in your talking, just in your efforts, to show that you care about the other people in this room. And I'd encourage you to do that. We all need to get better at this, and I encourage you to do that now. Let me pray for you. God, we are thankful for your word. We're thankful for the example of Onesiphorus. I pray that we would take to it. I pray that we would want to be like him. I pray that we would even find people in our lives that we know need support. I pray we'd be intentional about it and make the choice and make the plan and then to follow through. Pray that you'd grow this ministry in holiness and godliness and good relationships because of what your scripture says and what we learned this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.